the Prince George's County OIT-GIS booth in TuGIS. Today we're going to be having a discussion with our newest GIS analyst and project manager, Mr. Erick Pate. He's going to be discussing our implementation of ArcGIS Monitor. And just to let you know, this is being recorded so we can play it back at later on for those that may have missed it. Mr. Pate, Erick, go ahead. I want to go ahead and let you take over.
Okay, thanks, Charlie. I'm going to share my screen, hopefully. And let's get this going. Okay, so this morning we want to turn our booth and our discussion over looking internally. And so much of TuGIS has to do with applied GIS and doing all these great things and with GIS and improving communities. In OIT-GIS, where Charlie and I work, we do some pretty cool stuff as well, but a lot of our work is helping other GIS analysts and GIS specialists throughout the Prince George's County, helping them do their work and also being sure that services are running, that our infrastructure is always up and available for them so that they can serve their customers. And so it's a slightly different role in GIS, and it's one that we enjoy. Part of what we have found, though, is there's always a challenge in keeping enterprise GIS infrastructure up and running. And there's all sorts of challenges, right? You have hardware issues, either your machine is running out of CPU or memory, or maybe you're out of disk space. Geodatabase problems, perhaps with your, we happen to have a SQL Server geodatabase, but you could have issues with your views and your queries, software issues related to your GIS services, or even sometimes application issues. So bad things can happen and impact your GIS infrastructure all through the stack. And it's always been a challenge to try and monitor how all those pieces are communicating, and if something goes wrong, to identify where that problem is. And we're no different than a lot of other organizations. We have a lot of servers, we have several geodatabases, and we have processes running, and it's hard to get a handle over all those things. So there's some tools out in the marketplace to let you monitor your infrastructure. And I'm thinking specifically, I've used a product called Spotlight, and I know there's others. And they're fine for what they are. I think I used Spotlight in a past life to monitor SQL Server, and for that purpose, it was totally adequate. But it's not very GIS centric, and I think that's true of a lot of those tools out there in the IT space. They don't understand what a GIS service is. They don't understand which services are important to a GIS enterprise. Particularly in the Esri world, and so they have limited usability as far as that goes. The other issue is you can't see across your entire enterprise, so it's easy enough to, if you're an administrator, to log into a particular machine and spool up Performance Monitor and look at the performance, maybe your CPU and RAM on that machine, right? Well, how do you do that when you have several machines? You could, through Performance Monitor, point to all those machines and try and monitor it that way, and it starts to get a little cumbersome, right? So seeing across all your enterprise, particularly with a large organization, is a real issue. And then lastly, some of these tools aren't proactive enough. So is it good enough to know that there's a problem after the problem has happened? Maybe that's too late, right? So what we were hoping to do in Prince George's County was to implement a tool to hopefully let us know when something bad was about to happen, so that we could be proactive and get ahead of the problem. So my intent is not to have a commercial for ArcGIS Monitor. It's the product that we were licensed to use, and it's the one that we implemented. So that's what I'm going to discuss. So ArcGIS Monitor, briefly, it's a licensed Esri product. You install it on a dedicated server, and it does the work of talking to all of your your GIS infrastructure. So we configure it to talk to our enterprise geodatabases. We configure it to talk to our GIS servers. And also, and I'll discuss a little bit more, we also have it listening to map services and letting us know if maybe that service is getting a little sluggish. Okay, so it's talking to, it's wired up and it's connected to all the pieces of our ArcGIS enterprise. And then it also alerts us if there's a problem that we've configured it to look for. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And I should have advanced this slide, but anyway, this is basically what I just discussed. So we're monitoring all these things right now through ArcGIS Monitor. The very last item, the websites, that HTTPS response is something that that I think is really intriguing, because we've connected our implementation of ArcGIS Monitor to point to specific map services that are kind of a test mule. So if this particular map service is rendering, we've set it up so that it alerts us if it takes longer than 3 seconds to refresh a particular tile, a particular map image. And if that happens, we get an email, there's a problem, right? I mean, 3 seconds is a lifetime. If that tile, that map image isn't rendering within that time, there's something wrong somewhere in the stack. And so that's something that's kind of cool that we've implemented. And we've actually had a few instances where I had to follow up and figure out what the problem was. Another interesting thing is with sort of a legacy situation in our department, we're responsible for managing a non-GIS application for our liquor control board. And so I've wired up ArcGIS Monitor that if that application goes down, and this application is running, it's a website that's running behind our firewall. If that website goes down, Monitor will send an alert. So one of the cool things I've found with Monitor is you don't necessarily have to restrict it to just GIS applications. At least with the HTTP, the website piece of it, you can connect it to non-GIS things as well. So when I come in the morning, I open up the ArcGIS Monitor front end that runs in the browser, and this is what I'm looking for. So this brings a little tear to my eye. It's a wonderful thing. There's a checkbox and a one. We have one production instance that we've wired up, and you can't see it real well in the slide, but it's green, and I love seeing green. Green is good. There's no situations going on, at least when this particular, when I took this screenshot. So if something not so serious is going on, this is what Monitor will look like. Okay, in this case, there's an alert and something's going on that needs a little bit of attention. The fact that it's orange means it's not super serious based on how we've configured Monitor, but there's something going on. And my next step when I see this is to click on the alerting. Okay, so I see that there's an alert. I would click on that alert, and what Monitor does is then open up. In this case, there was a minor alert with one of our ArcGIS servers. It automatically takes me to the logs on that server, so it spares me the step of having to open up Server Manager as an administrator, go into logs, define what type of log I was looking for in a time period. It's doing all that work for me. Okay, which actually is it's a nice little time saver as well, and you don't necessarily have to go looking for that in Server Manager. Monitor's doing all the work for you and presenting it to you, so that you never have to leave the ArcGIS Monitor product, which is I think pretty powerful. And in this case as well, I believe with this particular alert, it's configured to send an email to an email account that we set up specifically to catch the alerts from ArcGIS Monitor. So if you I described a situation where there's a problem, a minor problem, but still a problem. But we can also go in and proactively look at the performance of our map services and our infrastructure. So in this case, we're looking at one particular map service on a production machine. This is a machine that we're bringing up to production currently, actually. We're migrating some services over to it. So I can look at the ArcGIS stack on the left here, and I can expand and look at all my services on that machine. And then I can look at metrics related to services. In this case, not much was happening with this service for days and days, and then we see more transactions. This is a plot of transactions. So we started to get some things happening with that service after about August 4th. So if I'm interested in looking at infrastructure, which I do quite a bit, I can go down to the system group, expand this, and I'll see all of our servers, and I can look at the important things that I'm usually looking at are memory, CPU, and disk space, right? And so that's I can go in and see how all those machines are doing over a spread of time and I'm not showing it in this slide, but I can define the slice of time that I'm looking at. In this particular example, we're looking at about 5 days, but I can do it over 30 days or the last week or whatever I choose, even the previous day. So that's something that we use quite a bit.
Excuse me, you got about 10 minutes.
Thank you. And then this is an example of what we can do with monitoring those response times to a particular map service. So this is a map service that's running on one of our production machines. And so, the response times stay fairly consistent, but there's some spikes, right? And these spikes mean something. So this map service, you expect it to see, it renders that tile in a fraction of a second, but during this chunk of time, which is about 2 hours, I believe, that shoots way up. So why is that? And that's something that I would then follow up on and try and figure out, what's going on there. My favorite out of the box thing about Monitor, it spits out a report. This isn't even something we had to configure. Right out of the box, all the things that you monitor and then some, you can spit out in a standardized report. And it's really, really comprehensive, more than I could describe in the time that we have allocated. But it also gives you some actionable items. So in this example, when I'm looking at our services, in red here, and I moused over for this screenshot, but it's warning me that the maximum instances I have allocated on that service called address points is too low. And think about raising the minimum and the maximum up. So that's actionable information, right? I mean, that's something you can actually do something with. And so the next step would be to go back, look at that service, verify what the suggestion is, and raise those instances up, which is how I handle this particular problem. So I love that Excel report. It's a bunch of linked worksheets within an Excel document that is really, really useful. And that just comes out of the box. Couple lessons learned when you're doing an implementation of ArcGIS Monitor. Have your portal admin and your ArcGIS server initial site admin credentials handy, because you're not going to get too far without them. So have those handy. Don't be like me and have to go digging and pleading for those. And then if you have older infrastructure, which was the case with us, we had some older legacy infrastructure that we knew there was problems with. My recommendation is don't try and use ArcGIS Monitor to fix aging infrastructure that you're replacing anyway. Start new, start monitoring new stuff, and make your life easier. That older stuff, probably those problems, you're going to spend so much time trying to resolve problems on legacy stuff that if you intend to replace the infrastructure anyway, go ahead and start fresh on the new stuff. And then lastly, don't over alert. One of the mistakes I made was I had alerts going to that email address for the special email address that we set up. I had some days there'd be 70 alerts, right? And it's just too much. Every time the CPU spikes over 95%, you don't necessarily need an alert for it. The problem is if it happens over a sustained period of time. So don't over alert, adjust the number of alerts that you get to just the actionable level, because otherwise too many alerts and you stop paying attention. Next steps for us, we're going to master the root cause. There's a function that I haven't talked about within Monitor. That's the root cause analysis that actually helps you dig in. If there's a problem, helps you understand what is really, what's causing that problem. Right now, that work is happening manually, and that's a functionality that we want to master. And then there's some really cool extensions for ArcGIS Monitor as well that we'll be implementing, including an ArcSoc optimizer and an add-in that monitors SSL certificates. And that's the end of my presentation. Charlie, were there any questions that came in?
No questions. I'm glad you went into the over alerting, because I too have a tendency of trying to monitor things and get in and get overwhelmed by some of the stuff that comes in. How hard or how easy is it to filter out some of those things?
It's all totally configurable, and what I did initially was when you connect any piece into Monitor, including a piece of infrastructure, a server, when you connect, there's some default settings, and by one of the settings is one of the defaults with CPU is if a CPU hits, I think it's 90 or 95% of its capability, of its resources, it will trigger an alert. And so if you leave that in place, you're going to get an alert every time that happens. And on our infrastructure, it's not unusual for the CPU to hit 95%. And so you start getting a situation, if you're getting 20 alerts a day that your CPU's hitting 95%, if that's not actionable unless we're going to increase the CPU. In our case, we really weren't, because the rest of the time there really wasn't an issue. So those alerts, you can lose sight of what's really of those important alerts when you have 70 alerts in there. And so the trick is to, and now having implemented it, what I realize is maybe those defaults don't serve you very well. Maybe you need to go in and be a little bit more systematic and set up exactly what you want. So defaults are good, but they don't work in every use case, and they certainly didn't work for us.
Okay. Well, we've got about 4 minutes left. I'm going to go ahead and shut down the recording if there are no more questions.
Very good. Thank you for your attention.